This is the story of a girl named Rachel, and the most terrifying experience of her life. The time she moved in with a stranger she thought was just a quiet, shy roommate. What she didn't know was that behind that shy smile was something much darker, something that would change her forever. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, and once you hear it, you might think twice before ever sharing a home with someone you barely know. Rachel was 22, studying journalism at a university in Portland. She had just ended things with her longtime boyfriend and needed a new place fast. A classmate told her about a girl named Emily who was looking for a roommate. The apartment was clean, cheap, and only 15 minutes from campus. Rachel met Emily once before moving in. She seemed friendly, soft-spoken, and a little awkward. Her eyes darted away during conversation, and her smile felt forced. But Rachel didn't sense anything dangerous, just social anxiety maybe. So, she signed the lease and moved in the next week. The first month was quiet. Emily mostly stayed in her room. She worked from home as a freelance editor and rarely went out. Rachel had the living room to herself most of the time. Emily was polite, always paid her half of the bills on time and never made any noise. But there was something strange about the way she moved, slow and precise, like she was always thinking about every step she took. And she had a habit of standing silently in the kitchen, staring at nothing, for minutes at a time. Rachel brushed it off. Everyone has their quirks, right? But then things started happening that she couldn't explain. One evening, Rachel came home late from the library. The apartment was dark, and Emily's door was shut, so she tiptoed to the bathroom. When she turned on the light, she nearly screamed. Written on the mirror in what looked like lipstick were the words, "You shouldn't be here." Her heart was pounding. She opened the bathroom door and peeked down the hallway. Nothing. No sound. Emily's door was still shut. Rachel wiped the mirror clean and told herself it had to be a joke. Maybe a bad prank from someone who had access. But the door had been locked. Only she and Emily had keys. The next morning, Rachel asked Emily about it. Emily stared at her for a long time and then softly said, "I didn't write anything. Are you sure you're okay?" That was it. No concern, no confusion. Just a flat response and a cold stare. Over the next 2 weeks, things got worse. Rachel would find her closet doors open when she knew she had shut them. Her phone would be moved from the charger. One night, she woke up to find all her drawers pulled out. Not emptied, just opened, as if someone had gone through everything and then walked away. Then came the night Rachel will never forget. She was home alone, or so she thought. Emily had told her earlier that morning that she was going to stay with her sister for the weekend. Rachel spent most of the evening relaxing on the couch watching a movie. Around midnight, she got up to get a snack. As she passed Emily's room, she noticed the door was cracked open. Curious, she peeked inside. The room was almost completely bare. No books, no laptop, no bed sheets. Just a mattress on the floor, and a few stacked cardboard boxes. One of the boxes had a lid that was half open. Rachel's curiosity got the better of her, and she stepped inside. She opened the box. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Pictures of Rachel, sleeping, eating, sitting on the couch. Some were taken through the crack in her door. Others looked like they were taken from inside her room. Her hands shook as she picked up one photo showing her brushing her hair in the bathroom. It was taken from behind. She dropped the picture and turned to leave, but something caught her eye. In the corner of the room beside the dresser was a small hole in the wall. She crouched down to look. It connected directly to the other side, her bedroom. That's when it hit her. Emily had been watching her, studying her. This wasn't just strange, it was deeply disturbing. Rachel ran back to her room, locked the door, and called the police. When they arrived, Emily was in the apartment, not gone for the weekend. She had been hiding in the small storage attic above the hallway. The officers found her crouched in the corner, holding a small notebook full of Rachel's daily activities. Times she woke up, what she wore, what she ate. Notes like, cried again today, seems weaker, almost ready. Emily was arrested that night. Rachel later learned that Emily had lied about everything. She wasn't working as an editor. She had no sister. In fact, her real name wasn't even Emily. It was Sarah Thompson, and she had changed her identity after being investigated for stalking a woman in another state. That case had been dropped due to lack of evidence. What really scared Rachel wasn't just the stalking or the photos. It was what could have happened next. The notes suggested Sarah believed Rachel was meant for something. What that was, no one could say for sure. But the final entry in the notebook read, "Tomorrow, midnight, she'll finally see the truth." Rachel moved out that week. She never returned to that apartment again. For months after, she couldn't sleep without checking every corner of her room, covering her windows and double locking her doors. Therapy helped a little, but the fear never really went away. Even now, years later, she still wakes up sometimes thinking someone's watching her. Because when you've lived with a monster hidden behind an ordinary face, it's hard to ever feel truly safe again. So the next time you meet a quiet, polite roommate, ask yourself this: how well do you really know them? Because sometimes the most disturbing horror stories aren't made up. They're real, just like this one. This is the story of a guy named Ben who thought he had found the perfect roommate, someone polite, responsible, and quiet. But what he didn't know was that behind all of that calm behavior was something so dark, so twisted, that it would haunt him for the rest of his life. This isn't just a spooky tale. I'm telling you this as it happened, exactly how Ben told me. Believe me or not. But this is the disturbing true roommate horror story you won't forget. Ben was 24 and had just landed a job at a marketing firm in Boston. It was his first real step into adult life, and he was excited. He couldn't afford to live alone just yet, so he searched online for roommates. That's how he met Tyler. The listing showed a clean 2-bedroom apartment with bright windows and a small balcony. Tyler introduced himself through a short message, said he was working as a night janitor at a hospital, so he'd rarely be home during the day. When Ben met him in person, Tyler seemed totally normal. A bit quiet, but respectful. He had pale skin, short blonde hair, and always wore a blue hoodie, even indoors. His handshake was soft, his voice low. Nothing about him raised red flags. Ben moved in that weekend. The first week was smooth. They barely saw each other because of their opposite schedules. Tyler would leave around 7 p.m. and return around 4 in the morning. Ben would wake up, see Tyler's door shut, go to work, and come home to an empty apartment. For a while, it worked out perfectly. But then the noises started. It began with footsteps. Ben would be lying in bed, ready to fall asleep around midnight, and he'd hear footsteps coming from the living room. Soft, slow, pacing back and forth. But when he'd check, no one was there. The first few times he assumed Tyler had come home early. But when he checked Tyler's door, it was still closed, and no light came from under the crack. And by morning, Tyler's shoes would still be wet, like he had just returned. One night, Ben decided to test it. He waited until 1 a.m., and when the pacing began, he turned off his bedroom light and crept toward the hallway. The moment he reached the living room, the noise stopped. It was dead silent. He stared into the darkness for a full minute, but there was nothing there. The next day, he casually asked Tyler, "Hey, do you ever hear weird noises at night?" Tyler didn't look up from his cereal. He just mumbled, "No." Then he stood up, walked to his room, and shut the door behind him. That was it. A few days later, things got weirder. Ben noticed that small things in his room were being moved. His closet door would be cracked open when he knew he'd closed it. A book he left on his nightstand would be on his bed instead. He began locking his door before going to work, just to be safe. Then came the night everything changed. Ben came home late after hanging out with friends. He walked in, turned on the lights, and stopped cold. On the kitchen counter was a small, old-looking notebook. It wasn't his. It had a cracked leather cover and yellowed pages. Curious, he opened it. Inside were pages filled with strange writing. Some were numbers. Others were lists. Names of people. Some crossed out, some underlined. He flipped to the middle of the notebook and read a sentence that made his blood run cold. "Ben talks in his sleep. I wonder what else he'll tell me." His hands trembled. He looked toward Tyler's room. The door was open just a few inches. Darkness stared back at him. He put the notebook down and slowly backed away. Then he noticed the camera. There, sitting just behind the curtain in the living room, was a small black camera, half hidden. It pointed straight toward the couch, the same couch Ben would crash on when he was too tired to go to bed. He didn't sleep that night. He stayed in his locked room with a chair against the door. He kept a knife from the kitchen beside his bed. In the morning, when he knew Tyler had left for his shift, he packed a bag and went straight to his friend Marcus's apartment. Later that afternoon, Ben returned with Marcus to grab more of his stuff. Tyler wasn't home. But as they were packing, Ben noticed something strange. The closet in Tyler's room was slightly open. Against better judgment, they looked inside. Behind Tyler's hanging clothes was a small, hidden hole in the wall. Not wide, but just enough to fit a camera lens. Ben followed the angle of it. It led straight into his bedroom wall. Marcus stuck his phone into the hole and used the flashlight. The lens of a tiny camera reflected back. Ben called the police. They arrived and searched Tyler's room. They found more notebooks, dozens of them. Each one filled with obsessive notes about Ben, his routines, what time he brushed his teeth, what shows he watched, what he muttered in his sleep. Some entries even described what Ben dreamed about. And even more disturbing, there were sketches, drawings of Ben sleeping, Ben eating, Ben talking on the phone. Police told Ben that Tyler had no criminal record, but they suspected he had been watching other roommates before. One officer said, quietly, "He was obsessed with you. Completely." They never found Tyler after that night. He didn't return to the apartment. His phone was off. His job said he quit suddenly and never came back. It was like he vanished. Ben moved in with Marcus permanently after that. For months, he couldn't sleep without the lights on. He'd check behind walls, inside vents, even under his bed. The idea that someone had been living beside him, watching him, listening to his most private moments, it broke something inside him. Even now, years later, Ben still struggles to trust new people. That calm, polite guy he thought he could live with turned out to be a quiet predator, hiding in plain sight. So when people talk about bad roommates, messy ones, loud ones, ones who don't pay rent, Ben just nods and stays quiet. Because until you've lived with someone who watches you through your walls, you don't know what real horror is. And that's the disturbing true story of Ben's roommate. This is the story of a woman named Claire and the most chilling experience she ever went through. Something so bizarre and unsettling that to this day, she refuses to live with another person. I'm going to tell you everything exactly as it happened to her. This isn't a campfire ghost story. This is real. And it will make you question how well you truly know the people you let into your home. So sit back and listen carefully, because this is Claire's disturbing true roommate horror story. Claire was 26 at the time, working as a junior graphic designer in Seattle. She just ended a toxic relationship and was trying to start fresh. A new apartment, a new life, and unfortunately, a new roommate. Rent in the city wasn't cheap, and her budget didn't give her many options. After a week of searching, she came across an ad. Quiet roommate wanted. 1 bedroom available in a 2-bedroom apartment. Prefer females. Non-smoker. Clean. The ad was posted by a woman named Vanessa. Claire met her the next day. Vanessa was polite, soft-spoken, and neat. Almost too neat. Her long black hair was always tied back. Her clothes were simple and clean, and her voice never seemed to rise above a whisper. Claire asked about her job, and Vanessa said she worked from home as a transcriber for court hearings. That explained why she was home so often. Everything seemed normal, if a bit quiet. Claire signed the lease the following week and moved in. The first few days were fine. Vanessa kept to herself and rarely left her room. She never had friends over, never played music, and kept the place spotless. It was almost like Claire lived alone. But that silence, it started to feel heavy, like there was a presence just behind the wall, always listening. Claire tried to be friendly. She invited Vanessa to have dinner together one night. Vanessa declined with a smile and said she didn't eat much at night. Claire noticed something odd then. Vanessa's smile never touched her eyes. It looked rehearsed, like something she'd practiced in a mirror. One night, about 2 weeks after moving in, Claire was brushing her teeth when she thought she heard whispering, faint and low, coming from the hallway. She froze, toothbrush in hand, and turned off the faucet. There it was again, soft, hushed words, but she couldn't make out what was being said. She stepped into the hallway. Vanessa's door was slightly ajar, and a dim glow came from inside. Claire called her name. No answer. The whispering stopped. The next morning, Vanessa acted like nothing had happened. Claire told herself she had imagined it. Maybe she was tired. Maybe it was the neighbors through the wall. But it didn't stop. The whispering happened again the following night, louder this time. Claire tiptoed toward the room and listened. She could hear Vanessa talking, but only one voice. What she said made Claire's blood run cold. She doesn't know yet, but she will. Claire backed away, heart pounding. She couldn't sleep that night. She locked her door and pushed a chair against it. Her dreams were filled with whispers and shadows. In the morning, Claire pretended to be sick and called in to work. She needed to clear her head. She waited until Vanessa went out, which she rarely did, then went into her room. It was strange. Very strange. There were no personal decorations, no pictures, no books. Just a small desk, a laptop, and piles of notebooks. Claire opened one, then another. Every single page was filled with names, dates, and long passages about people, strangers, co-workers, neighbors. Vanessa had written about their habits, their routines, what they wore, what they said when they thought no one was listening. It was like reading a stalker's journal. Claire flipped to the last notebook on the desk. The entries were all about her. Pages and pages of detailed notes about her sleeping patterns, her food, her work schedule. And in one entry, it read, "I think she's ready, just like the others. She doesn't suspect a thing." Claire's stomach dropped. The others? Who were the others? That night she tried to act normal. She smiled at Vanessa, made tea, and even asked how her day had been. Vanessa smiled back and said quietly, "You're sleeping better now, aren't you?" Then walked away before Claire could respond. Claire barely held it together. She knew she needed to leave, but she didn't want to make Vanessa suspicious. So the next morning she packed a few essentials and left for work, but didn't go in. Instead, she stayed with her coworker Jenna and made up a story about a family emergency. That night, she called her landlord and asked if there had been any complaints about the apartment or previous tenants. The landlord was quiet for a moment, then said, "Funny you ask. You're the third girl to rent that room in the past year. The others broke the lease early, said the roommate gave them the creeps." Claire's blood turned cold. She asked for their contact info, but the landlord didn't have it. They'd both changed numbers and never returned his calls. Claire decided not to go back alone. The next day, she returned with Jenna and two guys from her office. Vanessa wasn't home. They quickly packed Claire's things and left. But before leaving, Claire looked under Vanessa's bed, where something shiny had caught her eye. It was a box, a small wooden one. Inside were more notebooks and a flash drive. Back at Jenna's place, Claire plugged the flash drive into her laptop. What she saw confirmed everything. Dozens of recordings, audio clips of her talking in her sleep. Some were just soft murmurs, others were clearer. One clip, dated just 2 nights before, had her whispering, Don't come closer." Her voice was trembling like she was dreaming of someone approaching. The last clip was the most disturbing. It wasn't Claire speaking. It was Vanessa. "I wonder how she'll react when she realizes she's being studied. I wonder if she'll scream like the last one, or maybe she'll freeze. That's always my favorite." Claire reported everything to the police. They began an investigation, but Vanessa had vanished. No trace. The laptop and journals were gone when they checked the apartment. She had cleaned out completely. But they did find something else. In a storage unit rented under a fake name, they found dozens of journals, each with a name on the first page. And none of those names could be traced to living individuals. To this day, Vanessa has never been found. Claire moved across the country, changed jobs, and refuses to live with anyone else. Sometimes she still checks her walls for hidden mics, covers her webcam, and wakes up in the middle of the night thinking she hears whispers. Because the truth is, evil doesn't always show up as a monster. Sometimes it wears a quiet smile, speaks softly, and sits just across the hall. That was Claire's disturbing true roommate horror story. This is the story of something I went through a few years ago, and to this day, it still gives me chills when I think about it. I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened, every detail, and you can decide for yourself what to believe. But I swear this is all true. This is my disturbing roommate horror story. It all started when I transferred to a new university and needed a place to stay off campus. I didn't know anyone in the city, so I went online and found a shared apartment listing. Rent was cheap and the location was decent. The ad was posted by a guy named Marcus. He said he was quiet, worked night shifts, and would mostly keep to himself. Sounded perfect to me. I moved in 2 weeks later. When I first met Marcus, he seemed normal. A little off maybe, but nothing too strange. He was tall, skinny, with messy dark hair and pale skin. He barely made eye contact and kept his voice low. I figured he was just shy. The apartment was clean but felt oddly empty. There were no personal items in the living room, no pictures, no decorations. His room door was always shut. I didn't think much of it at the time. Things were okay for the first couple of weeks. I didn't see him much since he worked nights and I had classes during the day. But soon, I started to notice little things. My shampoo bottle in the bathroom would be moved. Food would be missing from the fridge, even though Marcus said he didn't cook or eat at home. Once I found a spoon with peanut butter on it just sitting in the sink. I don't eat peanut butter. I asked him about it and he just shrugged. Maybe I used it and forgot, he said. Then he walked away. I let it go, thinking maybe I was just overthinking things, but it got weirder. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I passed the hallway, I noticed Marcus's door was open just a crack. I glanced toward it and saw him standing there in the dark, not moving, not saying anything, just standing in his doorway looking straight at me. I froze. I whispered, "Marcus," but he didn't answer. He just slowly closed the door. I couldn't sleep after that. The next day I asked him if everything was okay. He just smiled and said, "Bad dreams. Sorry if I scared you." That smile didn't reach his eyes. There was something hollow behind them. I started locking my bedroom door at night after that. A few nights later, I was studying late in my room with headphones on. Around midnight, I took them off and noticed the apartment was dead silent, too silent. I stood up to stretch, and that's when I heard it. A soft, slow, dragging sound coming from the hallway, like someone was slowly dragging their feet across the floor. I opened my door just a little and peeked out. Marcus was crawling, yes, crawling, down the hallway, on his hands and knees wearing nothing but shorts, his eyes wide open and staring straight ahead. He didn't seem to see me. He was whispering something, but it was too quiet for me to hear. I shut my door and locked it immediately. I sat in bed with a baseball bat for the rest of the night, heart pounding. In the morning, I confronted him, again. He acted confused. "You must have been dreaming," he said with a calm voice. "I wasn't even home last night, worked the whole shift." But I saw him. I knew what I saw. I began to think maybe something was seriously wrong with him, mentally or otherwise. I considered moving out, but my schedule was packed and I couldn't afford a new place immediately. I just told myself to keep to myself, keep the door locked and avoid him. Then came the worst night. It was a weekend, and I had stayed in to catch up on assignments. Around 11 p.m. I went to bed. At some point in the night, I woke up to the sound of something tapping, tap, 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 from my closet. At first I thought it might be a mouse or something, but then I realized the tapping was too steady, too rhythmic. I turned on the lamp beside my bed and stared at the closet door. It was slightly open, just an inch or two. The tapping stopped. My throat went dry. I got up slowly and walked to the closet, telling myself it had to be nothing. But when I opened it, I found a small camera hidden inside, duct taped to the corner wall, pointing right at my bed. I lost it. I grabbed the camera and stormed to Marcus's room. I pounded on his door, shouting his name. No answer. I opened it. It wasn't locked. The room was freezing cold. There were no blankets on the bed, no clothes, just a chair in the center, and some books stacked on the floor. But what really stopped me was the wall. It was covered in pictures. Pictures of me sleeping, me eating, me walking to class. Some photos I couldn't even remember being taken, and in some of them, Marcus was in the corner of the frame just watching. I backed out slowly, breathing fast. I called the police. When they arrived, Marcus was gone. No sign of him anywhere. They searched the whole building and never found him. All his stuff, what little there was and was left behind, the photos, the camera, even a journal where he had written strange things about observing me and protecting me from some invisible force. The police said it seemed like he had just walked out and vanished. I moved out that same week. I never slept properly again for months. I kept checking closets, vents, anything that could hide a camera. Even now, I double lock every door and never take a roommate again. I don't know who Marcus really was or what he wanted. All I know is that I was being watched, studied, and maybe worse. So if you ever think about moving in with a stranger just because the rent is cheap, think again. Sometimes it's not just weird habits or messy kitchens. Sometimes you're living with something far more disturbing. And trust me, I know. This is the story of a man named Josh, and the nightmare he lived through when he shared an apartment with someone he barely knew. It's not a ghost story. It's not about something supernatural. But I promise you, it's terrifying in a way that stays with you long after the lights are off. This is Josh's disturbing true roommate horror story. Josh was 27 when he moved to Denver for a new job in IT support. He didn't know many people in the city, and he was trying to save money. So instead of renting a one-bedroom, he went on a roommate finding app. That's how he met Andrew. Andrew's profile seemed ideal. He described himself as a night owl who loved reading, cooking, and keeping things clean. When Josh met him in person, Andrew seemed normal. A little too enthusiastic maybe, but friendly. He had dark brown hair, wore glasses, and had a soft, cheerful tone. He told Josh he worked from home as a freelance researcher and preferred to stay indoors most of the time. Josh was fine with that. They signed the lease and moved in a week later. At first, things were fine. Andrew cooked often and always offered Josh a plate, though Josh usually declined. The guy kept his room clean, paid his share on time, and was surprisingly quiet. In fact, too quiet. Josh started to realize he almost never saw Andrew leave the apartment. He never went for walks, never brought anyone over, never even got food delivered. But still, everything seemed okay. Until one evening. Josh came home from work and noticed that the lock on his bedroom door was slightly scratched around the knob, as if someone had tried to pick it. He never locked it unless he was going on a weekend trip, and this past weekend, he'd done exactly that. He remembered clearly that everything was fine when he'd left. He asked Andrew about it. Andrew laughed and said maybe the cleaning lady had bumped into it. They didn't have a cleaning lady. Josh told himself it was probably just his imagination, or maybe he was overreacting. But things didn't stop there. One night, Josh woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen around 2 a.m. As he passed the living room, he saw Andrew sitting in the dark. No lights, no sound. Just sitting on the couch, perfectly still, staring at the blank TV screen. Josh froze. "Hey man, you okay?" Andrew didn't answer right away. Then, without turning his head, he said, "Do you ever feel like someone's watching you when you're asleep?" Josh forced a nervous laugh. Not really." Andrew finally turned to look at him. His face was blank. "I do. All the time." Josh went back to his room and locked the door. A few days later, Josh started noticing things had moved in his room. His drawers slightly open, his socks rearranged, one of his jackets missing. He thought maybe he was just tired from work, or maybe he had forgotten. But then he found something under his bed that didn't belong to him, a small leather-bound notebook. He opened it. Inside were detailed notes written in small, tight handwriting. Most of them were about him. Josh leaves for work at 8:45. He showers for approximately 12 minutes. He spoke to a woman on the phone last night. He laughed 3 times. I think it was forced. Page after page of entries, like someone had been watching him and studying his every move. But the last few entries were worse. They weren't just observations, they were predictions. Soon he'll ask me to leave, but I won't go. Not until I'm finished. He sleeps so deeply, he doesn't even hear the door. Josh couldn't breathe. His hands were shaking. He snapped a few pictures of the notebook, then put it back exactly where he found it. He didn't want Andrew to know he'd seen it. That night, he didn't sleep. He stayed up, sitting in bed, holding a hammer he'd grabbed from the toolkit. Every little creak made him jump. Around 3:30 a.m. he heard footsteps, soft, careful, just outside his door. The shadow of feet beneath the gap. Then, nothing. In the morning, Josh left early and called in sick. He spent the day with a friend, trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, they decided to go back together and confront Andrew. When they returned, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Josh walked to Andrew's room and knocked. No answer. He opened the door. Andrew was gone. The room was stripped clean. No bed, no clothes, no books. Just an empty room and a folded note on the floor. It read, "You ruined it. I was so close." Josh called the police. They searched the apartment and found something horrifying. Inside the hallway ceiling vent, they discovered a small mounted camera pointing directly at Josh's bedroom door. Behind the wall, in the air duct, were scraps of paper with more notes about Josh, torn out pictures from his Instagram, and strands of his hair tied with thread. Like something out of a ritual, they couldn't trace where Andrew had gone. The contact info he gave on his application turned out to be fake. Even the name Andrew didn't match any ID records. He had simply disappeared. Josh was forced to move out. He changed his phone number, deleted all his public social media, and stayed with friends until he found a new place. To this day, he still doesn't know what Andrew meant by, "I was so close." But he knows it wasn't just weird, it was dangerous. Someone had been living in his home, watching him, recording him, planning something. So now, when people ask Josh why he insists on living alone, why he double-checks his locks, and why he doesn't trust roommate apps, he just smiles tightly and says, "It's a long story." Because it is, and it's true, and it's terrifying. This is the story of Ethan, a quiet, easygoing guy who never thought twice about trusting people. He was always the type to give others the benefit of the doubt, to assume the best instead of fearing the worst. But what happened to him changed that forever. Because sometimes it's not the dark alley you should fear, or the stranger on the street. It's the person you let live under the same roof. This is Ethan's disturbing true roommate horror story. It started when Ethan moved. to Portland for a new job at a small tech company. He had just turned 25, didn't know anyone in the city, and needed a place fast. After scrolling through dozens of ads, he found one that seemed ideal. A charming house in a quiet neighborhood with one roommate, a guy named Travis. The place was tidy, rent was affordable, and Travis seemed normal enough. He was around Ethan's age, with short blonde hair, a friendly voice, and an easy smile. He said he worked part-time at a bookstore and spent most of his time reading or writing fiction. Ethan didn't get any weird vibes. They signed the lease and Ethan moved in a few days later. For the first couple of weeks, things were smooth. Travis kept to himself, didn't leave dishes out, didn't make noise at night, and the ideal roommate. Occasionally, they'd chat in the kitchen about movies or music. Ethan noticed Travis never really talked about his personal life, but he didn't push it. Not everyone opens up right away, but one night things started to feel off. Ethan was working late on his laptop when he heard footsteps outside his bedroom door. Not just walking past, they stopped right outside. Then a soft knock. He got up, opened the door. No one there. He stepped into the hallway. It was completely empty. Travis's door was closed, and the apartment was dead silent. Maybe it was just his imagination. But then it happened again the next night. Same knock, same silence. He opened the door quicker this time. Nothing. When he looked down the hall, Travis's door was slightly open, but the lights were off. He called his name, but there was no answer. He decided not to investigate and went back to his room, locking the door this time. The next morning, he asked Travis if he'd knocked on his door. Travis stared at him blankly for a few seconds and then said, "No, you must have been dreaming." That night, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He set up a small Bluetooth speaker beside his door and recorded sound using an app on his phone. He hit record, turned off the light, and went to bed. What he heard the next morning made his stomach turn. Around 2:14 a.m., there were soft footsteps, then breathing. Long, slow, heavy breathing. Right outside his door. It lasted almost 6 full minutes. Then there was a whisper, just one word, soon. Ethan didn't confront Travis. Instead, he started locking his door at all times. He kept a small knife in his nightstand, but he told himself he was probably being paranoid. Maybe it was just a prank, or maybe someone was trying to scare him, until he found the drawer. He had been cleaning the kitchen one Saturday morning when he dropped a spoon that rolled under one of the cabinets. When he bent down to get it, he noticed a small gap under the sink, a hidden drawer, almost like a compartment that had been built into the old cabinetry. Curious, he pulled it open. Inside were dozens of tiny scraps of paper, each folded carefully. Ethan opened the first one. It had his name on it, just his name, written over and over in tight, scratchy handwriting. He opened another. He sleeps with his mouth open. Another. 3 knocks tonight. Dozens of these notes. Some just listed times. Others described things Ethan had said, or done in the privacy of his own room. His hands shook as he picked up the last note. "I wonder if he'll scream." Ethan backed away, heart pounding. He packed a bag that night and stayed with his coworker Liam. When he told him what was going on, Liam didn't even hesitate. He said Ethan wasn't going back there alone. They returned the next morning, together, and Travis was gone. No note, no message. His room was stripped clean. Bed, desk, bookshelf, all gone. But one thing was left behind. A small wooden box sitting in the middle of Travis's empty bedroom. Inside were 3 items. A photograph of Ethan sleeping, taken from the side of the bed. A piece of tape labeled Ethan 20 AM breathing. A key, Ethan's room key, the one he always kept in his nightstand drawer. Ethan called the police. They searched the house, but there wasn't much they could do. Travis's ID had been fake. The phone number he gave the landlord was disconnected. No emergency contact, no forwarding address. It was like he had vanished. Ethan changed the locks the same day. He moved out 2 weeks later and started seeing a therapist for the anxiety and insomnia that followed. He couldn't stop thinking about the word in the recording. Soon. Soon what? What had Travis been planning? How long had he been watching him? And how had he gotten the photo, that close, that personal, without Ethan ever noticing? He still doesn't have answers. Just the memory, the fear, and the habit, still, to this day, of checking every lock twice before bed and sleeping with a baseball bat under his bed. So if you ever need a roommate and someone shows up with a calm smile, a fake job, and too many questions about your daily routine, just remember Ethan's story. Because sometimes, the scariest people don't break into your home, they move in quietly and wait. This is the story of Sarah, a cheerful, trusting woman who never imagined the person she shared her home with would turn her life into a waking nightmare. Not because of ghosts or monsters, but because of something far more unsettling. A person pretending to be ordinary while hiding something deeply twisted beneath the surface. This is Sarah's disturbing true roommate horror story. Sarah had just turned 29 when she moved to a small town outside of Denver. She had accepted a job as a school counselor and wanted a quiet, affordable place while she settled into her new role. She wasn't picky, just wanted somewhere safe with a decent roommate. After a few online searches, she found an ad. 1 bedroom available, quiet home, female roommate preferred, background checked, $500 month. The listing was posted by a woman named Brooke. Brooke was in her early 30s, soft-spoken, and seemed almost shy when they first met. She had light brown hair, wore thick glasses, and dressed in simple, oversized clothes. Her home was neat, too neat in fact, but Sarah took it as a good sign. Everything looked like it had its exact place. Not a single book out of line, not a speck of dust. Brooke explained she worked from home doing remote tech support and preferred peace and quiet. Sarah moved in the following weekend. The first few weeks went smoothly. Brooke was polite, always made her own meals, and spent most of her time in her room. Sarah tried to initiate a few friendly chats, but Brooke would keep things brief and then retreat to her room like a shadow. No loud music, no mess, no guests. Perfect on paper. But something didn't sit right. It started with the locks. One night, Sarah noticed her bedroom door didn't close quite right. She always locked it before bed. But one morning she woke up and found it open, just a crack. At first she thought she hadn't closed it properly, but it happened again the next week. She started pushing a chair in front of it at night. Then there was the mirror. One morning, Sarah came out of the shower and looked at her bedroom mirror. On the surface, written faintly in what looked like condensation, was a single word: smile. She wiped it off and stared at the mirror for a long time. Had it been from steam? Maybe an old writing reappearing? Still, the word didn't make sense. No one else had used her room and Brooke never went in there. Sarah asked her directly, "Hey, you haven't been in my room, have you?" Brooke looked up from her tea and blinked. "Why would I go into your room?" she asked. smiling too long. That smile stayed with Sarah all day. Later that week, Sarah noticed something else. Her pillow smelled different, like lavender, something she didn't use. Then her bedside lamp was slightly tilted. These were small things, but they added up. Then came the incident that changed everything. Sarah came home from work early one Thursday. Brooke wasn't in the kitchen or living room. Sarah was about to call out when she noticed the door to her own bedroom was closed. Strange. She always left it open when she left. Quietly, she approached the door. She turned the knob and pushed. It opened slowly. There, standing in the middle of the room, was Brooke, wearing one of Sarah's dresses. She had a brush in her hand and was slowly brushing her own hair, staring at the mirror. She didn't even flinch when Sarah stepped in. Sarah froze. What are you doing?" Brooke turned to her with an expression that was calm. Too calm. "You have such a beautiful life," she said. "I just wanted to feel what it was like." Sarah backed out of the room and left the house immediately. She didn't return alone. That night she came back with two of her male co-workers from school. They stood by while she packed an overnight bag. Brooke didn't say a word. She sat on the couch, hands folded neatly, staring at the floor. Sarah stayed at a hotel that weekend and called her landlord, who was stunned. He told her Brooke had lived there for only a few months and had seemed completely normal, but Sarah needed answers. She decided to go back one more time during the day, while Brooke was out. With the landlord's help, she got access to Brooke's locked bedroom. What they found was horrifying. Brooke's room looked more like a shrine. On one wall, taped in rows, were pictures of Sarah, taken without her knowing. Some were from inside the house, eating breakfast, tying her shoes, watching TV. Others looked like they were taken outside her school, at the grocery store, even once at the gym. In the closet were Sarah's missing items: a scarf, earrings, perfume, an old photo from her social media printed out and framed. But worse was the journal. It was filled with Brooke's tight handwriting, page after page of unsettling fantasies about becoming Sarah. Some entries were just mimicked schedules. Wake up, eat toast like Sarah, smile like Sarah, walk with her steps. Others were more delusional. She doesn't need her life anymore. I could do it better. I could love her friends more. I could be what she wastes. Sarah turned it over to the police. Brooke wasn't arrested because technically she hadn't broken any laws yet. But she was removed from the house and issued a restraining order. Police told Sarah that Brooke had been involved in similar roommate situations before. She would latch on, mimic, study, and then disappear when discovered. Sarah moved to a new town within 2 weeks. She changed her phone number, deleted all her social media, and stopped using her real name online. For months, she checked every mirror twice. She kept her doors locked at all times, even in the middle of the day. She couldn't sleep without a nightlight, terrified she'd wake up to find someone wearing her clothes again, pretending to live her life. But the most disturbing moment came one rainy afternoon. She received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid picture. It was a photo of her, taken through her living room window at her new house. She was sitting on the couch reading a book, and on the back, in delicate handwriting, were 2 words: "Still watching." That was the day she moved again, without telling a soul. Because some people don't just want to live with you, they want to be you. And that was Sarah's disturbing true roommate horror story. This is the story of Jake, a 26-year-old guy who thought he had landed the perfect roommate situation. No creepy vibes, no late-night noises, no strange smells coming from the kitchen. Everything seemed normal at first. But what happened over the next few months slowly unraveled into something so dark and twisted that it still keeps him up at night. This is Jake's disturbing true roommate horror story. It started when Jake moved to San Diego after a long, difficult breakup. He needed a change of scenery and a fresh start, so he accepted a marketing job in the city and started looking for a place to live. Rent was high, so he searched roommate listings and found one that looked promising. Quiet roommate wanted. Private room, no drama. The apartment belonged to a man named David. Jake met him at a nearby coffee shop, and at first glance David seemed like a chill, introverted guy in his early 30s. He wore old jeans, wire-frame glasses, and a neutral smile. He explained that he worked nights at a nearby hospital as a technician and slept during the day, so Jake would have the place mostly to himself. That sounded perfect to Jake. No loud parties, no forced conversations. He signed the lease 2 days later. At first, everything was smooth. Jake settled in quickly. David was polite, respectful, and barely around. He'd leave around 6 p.m. and return sometime before dawn. Jake rarely even saw him, except for the occasional morning run-in in the kitchen when David was heading to bed. There were no weird noises, no fights, nothing out of place. But then, little things began to happen. One evening, Jake came home and noticed the mirror in the hallway was missing, just gone. When he asked David about it, David looked confused and said, "What mirror?" Jake laughed and said, "The one that was hanging near the coat rack." David shrugged and said, "I don't remember there ever being a mirror there." Jake let it go. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe he was confusing it with his old apartment. A week later, it was the rug in the bathroom. Jake had a small dark blue mat outside the shower. One day it was just gone. When he asked David, he said, "We never had a rug." Jake started to wonder if he was losing his mind, but the moment he knew something was off came late one night. Jake had fallen asleep on the couch watching TV. Around 2 a.m. he woke up thirsty and got up to get some water. As he passed David's door, he noticed it was slightly ajar, and inside he saw a flickering blue light. Curious, Jake leaned in for a closer look. David was sitting at a desk with 3 computer monitors, all showing live surveillance footage. Jake recognized one of the views immediately. It was the living room, right where he had just been lying on the couch. Another monitor showed the hallway. Another showed his bedroom. Jake felt his blood turn cold. He backed away quietly, returned to the couch, pretended to yawn, and said loud enough for David to hear, "Man, I need to go to bed." Then he walked to his room, locked the door, and sat down shaking. There was no camera in sight, but now he knew something was wrong. The next morning, Jake woke up and searched his room. After checking behind furniture, inside vents, and under his bed, he found it. A tiny black pinhole camera, lodged into the corner of a bookshelf that faced his bed. It was nearly invisible. Jake didn't confront David immediately. He wanted evidence. That day, he bought a hidden camera of his own and placed it in a decorative vase in the living room, angled to catch anything suspicious. What he saw that night confirmed everything. Around 3 a.m., David came out of his room, barefoot and silent. He walked to Jake's door, stood there for several minutes, then slowly turned the knob. It was locked. David walked to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and returned with something shiny in his hand. A lockpick. He started working on Jake's door. Jake, watching this the next morning, could barely breathe. The video showed David getting the door open, stepping inside, and then disappearing from view. He was in there for 15 minutes. When he came out, he was holding something, Jake's t-shirt. Jake called the police that afternoon. When officers arrived and searched David's room, what they found was worse than he imagined. David had a small walk-in closet that had been converted into what they called an observation room. Inside were labeled folders, each filled with notes and printed images. There were time-stamped screenshots of Jake sleeping, changing, even brushing his teeth. David had written things like, "Smiles a lot in the morning, seems relaxed, likes routines, doesn't notice changes, still unaware, gaining trust." One notebook had a page titled "End Steps." Below it, in block letters, "Do it before he leaves." Jake had never mentioned he was thinking of moving out, but he was. He had started applying to new jobs in a different city just a week earlier. David was arrested and charged with unlawful surveillance, breaking and entering, and stalking. But because he hadn't yet hurt Jake, he was eventually released on bond while awaiting trial. The court issued a restraining order, and Jake was relocated by his employer to another city for his safety. But he never really felt safe again. For months, Jake had trouble sleeping. Every time he walked into a room, he scanned for cameras. He became paranoid, always checking behind vents, under furniture, even in bathrooms at hotels. He deleted all his social media, changed his phone number, and avoided giving his address to anyone unless absolutely necessary. One morning, about 2 months after David's arrest, Jake received a letter in the mail. No return address, just his name, neatly printed. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It was a picture of Jake standing at his new mailbox, taken from across the street. There was no note, no signature. Jake reported it immediately, but there were no fingerprints. No cameras in the area, nothing to trace it back. He doesn't know if it was David. He doesn't know if someone else was involved. But to this day, he still gets nervous checking his mail. So when people laugh off the idea of roommates being creepy or weird, Jake stays quiet, because some roommates aren't just strange. Some of them are watching, some of them are waiting, and that was his disturbing true roommate horror story. This is the story of Lauren, a 24-year-old nursing student who never expected her dream apartment would turn into a living nightmare. What happened to her wasn't supernatural. It wasn't a ghost or a monster. It was worse. Because it was real. It was human. And it happened behind a locked door, just a few feet from where she slept every night. This is Lauren's disturbing true roommate horror story. It started in the fall of 2021. Lauren had just transferred to a nursing program in Atlanta and found a charming old brick house split into 2 units. One upstairs, one down. The upstairs was already rented by a girl named April, who had posted an ad for a roommate. "Chill, clean, and respectful," the ad read. "I keep to myself but love true crime podcasts and baking. Looking for another female student to share the space." Lauren met April at a nearby cafe. She was friendly, well-dressed, and seemed completely normal. A little quirky maybe, but who wasn't? She wore colorful sweaters, talked about her love for murder mysteries, and gave off a slightly odd, bookish vibe, but nothing that felt threatening. They moved in together 2 weeks later. The apartment had a cozy living room, a tiny kitchen, and 2 bedrooms on opposite sides of the hallway. April kept her room locked, which Lauren thought was strange at first, but April explained she was a private person and had a lot of expensive gear for her side hustle editing podcasts. Fair enough. For the first month, everything was smooth. They weren't best friends, but they got along fine. April mostly stayed in her room, headphones on, working late. She never brought anyone over, never made noise, and always cleaned up after herself. She baked cookies a lot, sometimes at 2 in the morning. Lauren would wake up to the smell of sugar and butter, find a tray waiting on the counter. "Help yourself," scribbled on a sticky note. It seemed harmless, until Lauren started hearing the tapping. It always came late at night, around 1 or 2 a.m. Soft tapping sounds like fingers gently hitting the walls. At first she thought it was the pipes. Old house, old noises. But the sound was too deliberate. It moved. Sometimes it came from the kitchen, sometimes from outside her door. Sometimes it stopped the moment she sat up in bed, like someone knew she was awake. She asked April about it once. April just smiled and said, "This house has a personality, doesn't it?" One evening, Lauren came home from class and found her bedroom door unlocked. She always locked it when she left, even if April was home. Nothing looked disturbed, but one thing was missing. A small photo frame from her nightstand. The one with her and her younger brother at the beach. She searched the whole apartment. Nothing. When she brought it up to April, April frowned and said, "Why would I take your photo?" Then she changed the subject. Something about a new podcast she was editing. That night, Lauren locked her door and wedged a chair under the handle. But the real horror began a few days later. Lauren was doing laundry in the shared basement when she noticed something odd. The ceiling above the washer had a small panel slightly out of place. Curious, she dragged a chair over and gently pushed the panel aside. It revealed a narrow crawl space. Taped inside the wooden frame was her missing photo, and next to it were more pictures of her, sleeping, studying, walking through the kitchen. Dozens of them. Some were printed, some were Polaroids. Most were taken from inside the apartment. Lauren nearly threw up. She ran upstairs, shaking, heart pounding. April wasn't home. She called her friend Melanie, sobbing, and begged her to come over. Melanie arrived in 20 minutes and stayed with her as Lauren packed a bag. But before they could leave, April came home. She opened the door with a smile, holding a grocery bag full of baking ingredients. When she saw Melanie, her smile faltered. "What's going on?" she asked. Lauren stood behind Melanie, clutching her bag. "I know what you've been doing. I found the crawl space. I saw the photos." April didn't say anything. Her face didn't change. She just slowly placed the grocery bag on the counter. Then she whispered, "You weren't supposed to find that yet." Melanie pulled Lauren out the door. They didn't stop running until they reached the car. Lauren filed a police report that night. When officers searched the apartment the next day, they discovered what April had been hiding behind: her locked bedroom door. Her room was a replica, not of a crime scene, but of Lauren's own bedroom. Same posters, same blankets, even a similar stuffed animal on the bed. There were journals too, detailed accounts of Lauren's routines, habits, moods. Pages and pages of writing, like a script. Monday. She wakes up at 6:45, looks tired. Eats cereal. I love her hair when it's messy. Thursday. She smiled at herself in the mirror. It was beautiful. I did the same. There was also a whiteboard with a checklist titled Merge Timeline. The list included match wardrobe, copy voice inflection, create identical room. Final moment, replace police couldn't arrest April, not yet. No laws had been clearly broken, and she claimed it was an immersive fiction project. But she was evicted. Lauren moved out that weekend with help from her family and never returned, but the horror didn't end there. 2 weeks later, she received a letter in the mail. No stamp, no address, just her name, handwritten in neat cursive. Inside was a single index card. On it, in tiny print, were the words, "Still baking. Hope you're hungry." Lauren moved across the state after that. She changed her number, deleted her social media, and started over, again. To this day, she checks every lock, every vent, every ceiling panel. Because once you've lived with someone who doesn't want to hurt you, but wants to be you, it's a fear that never truly goes away. And that was her disturbing true roommate horror story. This is the story of Kevin, a 25-year-old college grad who thought living with a stranger would be a temporary fix, just a way to get on his feet while he saved up for his own place. But what started out as a normal living arrangement turned into a slow, creeping nightmare that he never saw coming, until it was far too late. This is Kevin's disturbing true roommate horror story. Kevin had just landed his first job in Cleveland after finishing his degree in mechanical engineering. He didn't have much savings, so he looked for a shared apartment to keep things affordable. He found a listing on a roommate site. Room available. Quiet. Clean. No parties. The rent was cheap, the apartment was close to his office, and the photos looked fine. The ad was posted by a man named Eric. When they met in person, Eric was soft-spoken, maybe in his early 30s, with thick black hair and a stiff posture. He had a strange, too-long handshake and made almost no eye contact, but Kevin didn't want to be judgmental. Eric said he was a night shift worker at a data center and would mostly keep to himself. Perfect. Kevin moved in the next week. The first couple of weeks went smoothly. Eric really did keep to himself. His bedroom door was always shut. He never left dishes in the sink, never made noise, and always greeted Kevin with a calm, "Hey," before disappearing down the hallway. Kevin figured it was just a guy who liked privacy. He could respect that. But then Kevin noticed something odd. His socks kept disappearing. At first it was just one or two and he blamed it on the dryer. But then entire pairs were missing. Then a hoodie. Then a wristwatch he always left on his nightstand. He asked Eric about it casually, but Eric just smiled and said, "Nah, haven't seen anything." It was annoying, but not scary, until Kevin started waking up in the middle of the night, not to sounds, but to a feeling. The feeling of being watched. He'd wake up in a sweat, heart pounding, and immediately look toward the door, half expecting someone to be standing there. But the door was always closed, locked. Still, he couldn't shake it. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, like something rotten. Not food, something sour, metallic, and unfamiliar. It came and went, stronger on some nights than others. He assumed Eric might be storing something weird in the fridge, but every time Kevin checked, it was spotless. Too spotless. One night, after waking up from another dream where someone was standing over him, Kevin decided to check the vents. The smell had been worse that evening, and it seemed to be coming from somewhere in the ceiling. He pulled a chair under the central vent in the hallway and unscrewed the panel. Inside, he found a sealed Tupperware container. When he opened it, He gagged. Inside was a clump of what looked like hair, his hair, and small curled pieces of fingernail. His fingernail. He recognized a bandage he had worn after trimming one too deep just a week earlier. He dropped it, ran to his room, and locked the door. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Kevin took the day off work and started checking the apartment more carefully. When Eric left, like clockwork at 7 a.m., Kevin went into his room for the first time. What he found turned his stomach. Eric's room was dark. The windows were covered with thick blackout curtains. There was no bed, just a sleeping bag on the floor. In one corner stood a mannequin, dressed in Kevin's missing clothes. The hoodie, the socks, even the watch. The walls were covered in yellow sticky notes, all written in the same handwriting. Many of them said things like, "Kevin eats at 6:30. Kevin watches crime shows. He likes when they cry. Kevin looks peaceful when he sleeps. Don't rush. Soon." One note in red ink simply read, "Practice first, then replace." Kevin backed out of the room, hands trembling. He called the police immediately. When they arrived, they found even more disturbing things. Eric had set up a small camera in the hallway vent, facing Kevin's bedroom door. They discovered dozens of pictures printed and stored in folders, all of Kevin in different moments, sleeping, brushing his teeth, watching TV. And then came the most terrifying discovery. Hidden inside a locked box under Eric's sleeping bag was a full notebook, handwritten entitled, "Becoming Kevin." It wasn't just notes. It was instructions. How to move like Kevin. How to talk like him. His routines, his opinions, even imagined conversations. It was as if Eric had been rehearsing a role, the role of Kevin, for months. The last page had a date. It was 5 days from then. Under it was one sentence. Final phase begins. Eric was arrested when he returned home later that day. He didn't resist. When questioned, he said calmly, "He doesn't use his life properly. I can take better care of it." Turns out Eric had a long history of mental illness and identity disorders, but had fallen through the cracks of the system. He had moved through multiple cities using different names, always finding male roommates, always learning, watching, until something gave him away. Kevin moved out that week. He hasn't lived with a roommate since. For months, he had trouble sleeping. He'd wake up gasping, convinced someone was in the room. He changed his name on social media, got a new phone number, and installed cameras in every apartment he lived in after that. But the worst part? A year later, he received an email from an unknown address. All it said was, "I almost had it. Still watching. Still waiting." He deleted it and changed his email. But deep down, he knows it's possible Eric didn't act alone. Or maybe he found a way out. Because the scariest part about living with a stranger isn't that they're annoying. It's that they may not want to live with you. They may want to take your place. And that was Kevin's disturbing true roommate horror story. This is the story of Emily, a bright, hopeful 22-year-old who had just moved to Los Angeles to chase her dream of becoming a writer. Like many young adults, she didn't have much money. All she needed was a cheap place to live while she worked, a part-time job, and submitted articles to online magazines. She found what seemed like the perfect deal. But what she didn't know was that the scariest stories aren't the ones you make up. This one was real. This is Emily's disturbing true roommate horror story. She found the listing on a community bulletin board. Room for rent, $400 month. Females only. Quiet and respectful home. The low price immediately caught her eye. She met the owner, a woman named Denise, the next day. Denise was in her late 40s, friendly, a little quirky. She wore vintage dresses and had that soft sing-song voice that reminded Emily of a kindergarten teacher. The apartment was old but clean, filled with plants, candles, and antique furniture. Denise said she'd lived there for years, and the extra room had belonged to her daughter, who now lived out of state. "I like young energy in the house," Denise had said, smiling sweetly. "It reminds me of when my daughter was here." Emily moved in the next week. At first, things were fine. Denise was generous and welcoming. She baked often, left little notes of encouragement on the fridge, and even made Emily tea every night. The room was cozy, and Emily felt lucky to have found such an affordable place in a huge city. Denise said she worked from home doing spiritual readings and often burned sage around the apartment. It was unusual, but Emily chalked it up to harmless eccentricity. But things started to feel strange. One night, Emily came home late after a writing event. She tried to quietly unlock the door, but it was already unlocked. She went inside and called out to Denise, but got no response. The apartment was dark. Emily tiptoed to her room. Her door was open. She always kept it shut. Always. She stepped inside. Nothing looked out of place. But something felt wrong, like the air had changed. She brushed it off and went to sleep. The next morning, she found one of her notebooks missing. The one she used for her most personal journal entries. She looked everywhere. When she asked Denise if she'd seen it, Denise just smiled and said, "Maybe it's with the spirits. They borrow things sometimes." Emily forced a laugh. Denise had a weird sense of humor, but she had been kind so far. 2 nights later, Emily woke to the sound of whispering. It was faint, coming from the hallway outside her room. She sat up, heart racing, and listened. She's ready now. Such a pretty mind. Emily stood and opened the door slowly. There was no one in the hallway. The next morning, she confronted Denise about it, half laughing, trying not to sound paranoid. "Were you talking last night outside my room? I thought I heard something." Denise stirred her tea and smiled without looking up. "I speak to many people, Emily. Not all of them are alive." That was the first time Emily truly felt scared. He started locking her bedroom door every night, but the locks didn't help. One night, Emily woke up to find the door cracked open. She was sure she had locked it. Her heart thundered in her chest. She reached for her phone. Dead. That was strange. It had been fully charged before she went to sleep. She reached for the lamp. It didn't turn on. Then, in the dim moonlight, she saw something on her desk. A plate with a slice of cake, a candle stuck in the middle, and a note. "Happy birthday, my sweet girl." Just like the old days. Emily hadn't told Denise her birthday, and it wasn't her birthday. Not even close. She packed a bag that night and stayed at a friend's place. When she returned the next morning, Denise was sitting at the kitchen table like nothing had happened. "You left your cake," she said with that same smile. Emily tried to be polite but distant and started searching for a new place. She needed to get out. Fast. That's when she found the closet. While Denise was out one afternoon, Emily went to retrieve her missing journal from the hallway closet, a place she hadn't looked before. But behind the towels and boxes, she found something hidden, a small wooden chest. Inside were photographs, all of her, sleeping. working at her desk, reading on the couch, dozens of them. And then, a photo of another girl, similar looking but not Emily. The same bed, the same room. A girl with the same haircut Emily had gotten just a few weeks ago. Taped to the back of the photo was a name, Clara, and a date from 5 years ago. Emily's blood ran cold. Underneath the photos was a folder of printed emails. They were messages between Denise and someone named Clara. At first they seemed loving, then desperate, then furious. The last message from Clara read, "Stop pretending I'm your daughter. I'm not. I'm leaving. Don't contact me again." Emily stepped back, hand over her mouth. She ran to her room, grabbed her things, and left that afternoon. The next day she called the police. They investigated the house. Denise wasn't arrested. She hadn't technically broken the law. But what they found made Emily's skin crawl. Denise had created dozens of fake online ads over the years, always looking for young female roommates, always ones who resembled Clara. The police couldn't reach Clara, and no one knew where she had gone. When asked about the photos, Denise simply said, "It's not wrong to love someone like your own." Emily moved in with her friend permanently after that. She changed her phone number, deleted her online roommate profile, and began seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety that followed. But the worst part? Months later, Emily received a letter in the mail. No return address, no signature. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence, "You're still my daughter even if you've forgotten." And that was Emily's disturbing true roommate horror story. This is the story of Mark, a calm, logical guy who never believed in paranoia or overreacting. The kind of person who kept to himself, focused on work, and figured that with a bit of common sense, everything in life could be managed. But that belief shattered the year he moved into a shared apartment with a stranger who seemed too quiet, too normal, and far too good at hiding the truth. What you're about to hear is real. It happened, and it left a scar on Mark's mind that's never fully healed. This is Mark's disturbing true roommate horror story. It started in the spring of 2022. Mark had just accepted a job in Dallas working IT support for a growing company. His new apartment was still under renovation, and he needed a temporary place, something cheap and short-term. He found an ad on a housing board that read, "Room for rent. 1 month minimum, clean and private, quiet roommate." The guy's name was Nolan. When Mark met him, Nolan seemed perfectly average. A bit pale, lanky, with short brown hair and glasses. He wore a wrinkled gray hoodie and smiled politely. He told Mark he was a freelance developer who worked odd hours, so he stayed in his room most of the time. The apartment itself was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and sparsely decorated, but it was clean, affordable, and available immediately. Mark, who didn't like wasting time or fussing over details, signed the short-term lease and moved in 2 days later. The first week was uneventful. Nolan barely spoke. He left the kitchen, spotless, didn't play music, and never brought anyone over. Mark almost never saw him, except for the occasional glimpse when he was grabbing coffee or slipping into his room. Sometimes, Mark could hear him typing rapidly in the middle of the night. Fast, rhythmic keystrokes, like someone who was obsessively working on something. No big deal, Mark thought, just a nerd with a deadline. But then small things started happening. Mark noticed that his bedroom door, which he always shut firmly, would sometimes be open when he got home from work. Nothing was missing, nothing was broken. But something felt wrong. He started placing small objects like coins on top of the doorframe just to see. And one day, one of the coins was gone. Another time, he found his drawer slightly open. He never left it that way. He started keeping his laptop in his backpack when he left the apartment. Something about Nolan's silence began to feel less like shyness and more like hiding. Then came the first real warning. One night, around 1-2 a.m., Mark was lying in bed drifting off when he heard something strange. Breathing. Not his own. Not from the vents. It was coming from just outside his door. Soft, steady, too close. He sat up, holding his breath. The sound stopped. He waited, heart pounding, then quietly got up, tiptoed to the door, and opened it suddenly. The hallway was empty. Nolan's door was shut. Mark didn't sleep that night. In the morning, he told himself he had imagined it. But just in case, he installed a cheap doorstop alarm on his bedroom door. 3 nights later, it went off. Mark jolted awake at 3:13 a.m. to the screeching sound of the alarm. He leapt out of bed and opened the door. Again, no one was there. But the feeling, that heavy, suffocating feeling of being watched, it was real. The next morning, he confronted Nolan. "I think you've been coming into my room," Mark said bluntly. Nolan didn't deny it. He just smiled, the corners of his mouth twitching slightly, and said, "Why would I do that?" No apology, no surprise. Just that unnerving smile. Mark decided then and there to find a new place, even if it meant paying double rent for a week. But before he could leave, something happened that still makes his skin crawl. Mark had taken the day off work to apartment hunt. Nolan was out, or so he thought. While taking a break in the kitchen, Mark noticed Nolan's bedroom door slightly ajar. He hesitated, then stepped closer. What he saw inside changed everything. Nolan's room was dark. The windows were covered in black cloth. The air smelled musty. There were sticky notes covering the far wall, dozens of them with strange, obsessively neat writing. Some were timestamps, others were observations. Mark showers at 7:08. Mark eats eggs on Wednesdays. Mark locks door now. Probably doesn't trust me. But worst of all, pinned to a corkboard, were photos of Mark. Sleeping, eating, using his laptop. Some of them were screenshots from inside his room. Private moments. One picture showed him asleep in bed, mouth open, taken from above. Mark's blood ran cold. He tore out of the apartment and didn't return. He filed a police report, but since nothing had technically been stolen, they couldn't do much. Mark retrieved his things with an officer present. Nolan didn't say a word, just stood silently in the corner watching, eyes unblinking. Mark asked the landlord if Nolan had a history of issues. The landlord hesitated, then said, "You're the 4th guy to rent that room in 2 years. The others left early too. One of them even broke the lease overnight." Mark moved to a new apartment that weekend, signed a long-term lease, and bought a home security system for peace of mind. He changed all his passwords, stopped posting on social media, and kept the blinds shut in every room. But 2 months later, he received a package at his new place. No return address. Inside was a USB drive. He plugged it into an old laptop that wasn't connected to the internet. What he found was a folder of audio files, hours of recordings, his voice while asleep, breathing, shuffling in bed. One clip had him murmuring in his sleep. Another had Nolan's voice whispering, "He doesn't know how close I am." That was the last straw. Mark changed his phone number, deleted all online roommate profiles, and never lived with anyone again. To this day, he doesn't know if Nolan is still watching, if he ever followed him, or if someone else somewhere is watching their new roommate with the same quiet obsession. So when people say, just find a roommate, it's cheaper, Mark looks away, because he knows cheaper isn't always safer. And that was his disturbing true roommate horror story. This is the story of Megan, a quiet, hard-working girl who only wanted a fresh start in a new city. What she got instead was something she never could have imagined. Something real, something terrifying. I'm going to tell you her story exactly as it was told to me. So listen carefully, because this is Megan's disturbing true roommate horror story. It all began when Megan, 25 years old, moved to Austin for her new job at a publishing company. She didn't know anyone in the city, and money was tight. So instead of getting her own place, she looked for a room to rent. After a few sketchy listings, she found one that looked decent. A small 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, posted by a girl named Laura. Laura was polite during the interview. She had a calm voice, a gentle smile, and seemed like someone who minded her own business. She said she was a grad student studying behavioral psychology, which sounded serious and harmless enough. The rent was affordable, the house was clean, and the vibe was quiet, exactly what Megan wanted. So she moved in. The first few weeks were uneventful. Laura was neat, soft-spoken, and spent most of her time in her room studying. Megan was busy settling into her job and didn't ask many questions. They got along well enough, though Laura never seemed quite normal. She never made eye contact for long, and she always spoke with the same flat tone, like she was reading from a script. Megan tried not to overthink it. People were different. As long as she paid her half of the bills and didn't steal food, who cared? But then things started getting weird. One night, Megan woke up around 3 a.m. She felt cold, even though her blanket was wrapped around her. She sat up and realized her bedroom door was open, just a few inches. She was sure she had closed it. She always did. She got up, checked the hallway. It was empty. Laura's door was shut and the house was quiet. Megan closed her door again, locked it this time, and went back to bed with her heart pounding. The next morning, she casually asked Laura if she had opened her door for some reason. Laura blinked slowly and said, "Why would I go into your room?" with that same expressionless face. A week later, Megan came home from work early. As she walked into the house, she heard voices, faint but clear. She thought Laura must be watching TV, but when she stepped into the living room, it was empty. No TV on, no one there. Confused, she called out Laura's name. Laura opened, her bedroom door a crack, and said, "I'm studying," before shutting it again. No explanation for the voices. Megan stood there in silence, feeling goosebumps crawl up her arms. It didn't stop there. She started finding small things moved around in her room. A book turned to a different page, her phone charger unplugged, her clothes rearranged slightly. In the drawer, she started locking her door every day before work. Still, things were off. Then one night, she came home to find Laura standing in the kitchen, facing the wall, not doing anything, not cleaning, not cooking, just standing there, completely still, her back turned to Megan. "Laura?" Megan said. Laura didn't move. It took a full 10 seconds before Laura slowly turned around and smiled. "You walk really quietly," she said, "like a cat." Megan forced a laugh. "You okay?" "Just thinking," Laura replied. Then she turned back to the wall. That night, Megan didn't sleep. She started staying at work late just to avoid going home, but she couldn't avoid it forever. The breaking point came one Saturday morning. Megan woke up late, stretched, and got out of bed, only to feel something strange under her foot. She looked down and saw a folded piece of paper on the floor. By her bed, she picked it up. Written in tiny, perfect handwriting was a message. "I watch you more than you think." Megan froze. Her eyes scanned the room. Nothing looked touched, but her skin crawled. She opened her closet, checked under the bed, looked out the window. Nothing. Her door had been locked all night. Hadn't it? She took the note, marched up to Laura's door, and knocked. No answer. She knocked again. "Laura, we need to talk." Still nothing. She opened the door. The room was dark. All the curtains were drawn, and the only light came from a desk lamp pointed at a pile of notebooks, dozens of them stacked and organized. The room was freezing, and in the middle of the bed, laid out perfectly, was one of Megan's shirts, neatly folded. She felt sick. She backed out of the room and called the police. When they arrived, they found something far worse than Megan had imagined. Behind Laura's closet was a hidden crawl space. Inside it were more notebooks, each filled with disturbing observations about Megan. Her routines, her moods, even notes about what she said in her sleep. But the worst part? There were Polaroid photos, dozens of them, pictures of Megan sleeping, eating, brushing her hair, sitting in her room. Some were taken from outside her window. Others were taken from inside the room. The police asked Laura where she got the photos. She smiled and said, "It's for my research. She was perfect." They arrested her on the spot. Laura had no family, no real enrollment records at the university, and no official job. Everything she'd said had been a lie. She had been squatting in different homes for over 2 years, pretending to be a roommate, and secretly watching the people she lived with. Megan moved out the next day. She never lived with a roommate again. For months afterward, she had trouble sleeping. She'd wake up and check the closet. She stopped opening her blinds. She even got a dog for protection. To this day, she doesn't know how long Laura had been planning everything, or how far she would have gone if Megan hadn't found that note. Sometimes the people who seem the quietest aren't harmless at all. Sometimes they're just waiting. And that was Megan's disturbing true roommate horror story. This is the story of Daniel, and what he went through still haunts him. He wasn't the kind of guy who believed in scary stories or gut feelings. He was logical, practical, and always brushed off fear as just paranoia. But after what happened with his roommate, he learned the hard way that some people don't show their darkness right away. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, behind a smile, a polite voice, and a locked bedroom door. This is Daniel's disturbing true roommate horror story. A year ago, Daniel moved to Philadelphia for his master's degree in criminology. He wanted to live close to campus but couldn't afford a solo apartment. So, like most people, he searched online. He came across an ad that sounded ideal. Spacious 2-bedroom apartment, furnished, quiet roommate, close to the university. The poster's name was Paul. Paul replied quickly, and they agreed to meet the next day. Daniel found Paul to be reserved but friendly. He was tall, thin, wore thick-rimmed glasses, and spoke in a slow, deliberate way. He said he worked nights as a security guard and would be out most evenings. The place was clean, the rent was fair, and Daniel felt no red flags. He moved in the next weekend. At first, everything was fine. Paul mostly stayed in his room during the day and left for work by 8 p.m. Daniel had the apartment to himself most nights, which he liked. He occasionally made small talk with Paul in the kitchen, who always responded with short answers and a flat smile. But after about a month, Daniel started noticing strange things. One morning, he woke up and found his phone on the kitchen counter. He clearly remembered charging it beside his bed the night before. Then, his desk drawers were slightly open when he returned home from class. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to feel wrong. He asked Paul casually if he ever came into his room. Paul just smiled. "Of course not, man. That'd be weird." Daniel tried to shake it off. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he was overthinking. Graduate school was stressful. But then came the humming. Late at night, Daniel began to hear a soft hum through the wall they shared. It wasn't music, not words, just a low, slow hum that rose and fell like a lullaby. It happened every night around 2 or 3 a.m. Sometimes it would last for just 5 minutes, sometimes almost an hour. Daniel thought about asking him, but how? Do you ask someone, "Why do you hum creepy tunes in the middle of the night?" One night, curiosity got the better of him. Daniel pressed his ear to the wall to try and make out the tune. That's when it stopped, instantly, as if someone knew he was listening. He pulled away, heart thudding, and stood in the hallway for a moment. Paul's door was closed, and no light leaked from underneath. The apartment was silent again. A few nights later, Daniel had a nightmare. In the dream, he was lying in his bed and couldn't move, completely frozen, unable to scream. He saw a figure standing in the corner of the room just staring at him. The face was blurry, but the presence was overwhelming. When he finally woke up, gasping for breath, his room was dark. He looked around, and his closet door was open. He never left it open. That's when he decided to install a small camera in his room. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something was off. He set it up near his desk and aimed it at the door just in case. 3 days later, he reviewed the footage. His heart nearly stopped. At exactly 2:13 a.m., while Daniel was asleep, his bedroom door slowly opened. A tall figure entered. Paul. He crept into the room, barefoot, wearing all black. He stood by the bed for a few seconds, then slowly knelt beside Daniel and just watched him sleep. He stayed like that for nearly 4 minutes. Then he stood, walked around the room, opened the closet, peeked inside, and finally left. Daniel couldn't believe what he was seeing. It didn't feel real, but it was. He didn't confront Paul, not yet. Instead, he called his professor, a former police officer, and asked for advice. The professor told him to call the authorities immediately and to not stay in the apartment another night. Daniel left that evening and went to a friend's place. He returned the next morning with the police. Paul wasn't home, but they let themselves in with Daniel's key. What they found in Paul's room was beyond disturbing. There were dozens of photos, all of Daniel. Eating cereal, leaving for school, sleeping, sitting at his desk. Some were printed from his phone. Others were screenshots from what appeared to be hidden camera footage. Even worse, they found small bags containing items Daniel hadn't even noticed were missing. A pair of socks, a used fork, an empty shampoo bottle. Paul had a journal too. It was filled with detailed notes about Daniel's behavior, sleep schedule, and habits. One entry read, "He trusts me now. He's calm when he sleeps. I think he's ready." Ready for what? That was the part no one could answer. Paul was arrested that night after returning home. He didn't resist. He just said softly, "I wasn't going to hurt him. I just needed to know." The police discovered that Paul had a history of psychiatric hospitalization, but had stopped treatment and disappeared from his family years ago. He'd been moving city to city, finding roommates through ads, observing them, and collecting pieces of their lives. No one had ever reported him before. Daniel was lucky. There were no signs Paul had planned violence, but the stalking, the obsession, it was enough to shatter his sense of safety. He moved into student housing after that and got therapy for months. He still checks his doors 3 times before bed, still sleeps with a lock on his bedroom door, still doesn't trust anyone who offers to be a roommate too quickly, because he knows now, monsters don't always knock on your door. Sometimes they're already inside, smiling, being polite, watching. And that was Daniel's disturbing true roommate horror story. This is the story of Olivia. And if you think bad roommates just leave dishes in the sink or play music too loud, you haven't heard what she went through. What started as a promising living arrangement turned into a slow descent into fear, confusion, and paranoia until the truth finally came out, and by then, it was almost too late. So sit back, listen carefully, and let me tell you Olivia's disturbing true roommate horror story. Olivia was 23, fresh out of college, and had just started her first job as a junior graphic designer in Chicago. She was excited, a little nervous, and like most young professionals, trying to save money. She couldn't afford her own place yet, so she found a listing online. A 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, already furnished, with one roommate looking to fill the second room. The roommate's name was Haley. Haley's profile said she was 28, worked from home as a freelance copywriter, and described herself as quiet, respectful, and clean. When Olivia met her, she seemed polite, a bit formal, but nothing unusual. Her dark brown hair was tied in a neat bun, her apartment was spotless, and she spoke in a calm, clipped tone, like she was always measuring her words. Olivia figured she was just a little reserved, maybe introverted. That wasn't a red flag. She moved in the next week. At first, things went smoothly. Haley mostly stayed in her room during the day, typing away on her computer. She rarely watched TV, never had guests over, and cooked simple meals. Always the same things: boiled eggs, white rice, and grilled chicken. Olivia tried to make small talk when they crossed paths, but Haley never shared much. She just smiled politely and excused herself. Then, about 3 weeks in, Olivia noticed something strange. She came home late one evening after visiting a friend and found a cup of tea on her desk. Her bedroom door had been closed and locked. When she left, she stared at the cup for a long time. It was still warm. She asked Haley about it the next morning. Haley looked confused and said, "Oh, I thought you'd want it when you got home. I used the spare key. Sorry if that bothered you." Olivia didn't even know there was a spare key, but she didn't want to seem rude, so she let it go. A few days later, it happened again. She came home to find her bed made the way she never made it. The corners were tucked in tightly, almost military style, and her phone, which she was sure she had left charging on the nightstand, was instead sitting neatly on her pillow. That night, she installed a small door stopper with an alarm. A week passed, no disturbances. Then, on a Wednesday night, Olivia woke up to a faint clicking sound, like metal brushing against metal. She froze. Her room was dark except for the small nightlight in the corner. Slowly, she sat up and stared at the door. The knob was turning, just a little, back and forth. She held her breath. After a few seconds, the sound stopped. In the morning, Haley acted normal, smiling, sipping her tea, talking softly about the weather. Olivia didn't say a word. She started looking for new apartments that afternoon, but the nightmare wasn't over. That Friday, Olivia came home early from work, around 2 p.m. She walked into the apartment and heard movement from her room. Confused, she crept quietly down the hall and opened her door. Haley was standing in the middle of the room, wearing Olivia's clothes, a long-sleeved sweater and jeans that didn't quite fit her. She froze when she saw Olivia, her eyes wide, mouth slightly open. For a second, neither of them said a word. Then Haley smiled, slowly, unsettlingly, and said, "I was just trying it on. I wanted to see what it felt like to be you." Olivia backed out of the room and left the apartment. Without grabbing anything, she went straight to her friend Naomi's house and called the police. When they arrived, Haley let them in calmly. She was no longer wearing Olivia's clothes. She'd changed back, as if nothing had happened. The police searched the apartment, with Olivia's permission. What they found chilled her to the bone. Inside Haley's closet were dozens of photos, all of Olivia. Some printed from her social media, others clearly taken inside the apartment. There were selfies Olivia had never taken, digitally altered to replace Haley's face with her own. There were journals too, filled with Haley's handwriting, pages that read like scripts of imagined conversations. "Olivia and I had breakfast today. She laughed at my joke. She said I looked good in her sweater. I think I'll wear it tomorrow. We are becoming the same." In a small locked drawer, they found a list titled "Steps to Completion," with items like speak like her dress, like her eat what she eats, enter dreams, unclear. Final merge, the police didn't find any illegal items, but they issued a no-contact order and warned Haley that further trespassing or theft would lead to arrest. Haley moved out within 3 days, but Olivia didn't sleep for weeks. She felt like her identity had been violated, not just her privacy, herself. Someone had been studying her, mimicking her, trying to be her. The fact that Haley hadn't been violent didn't make it less terrifying, it made it worse. Because it meant Haley had blended in without ever raising true suspicion. Even now, Olivia has a hard time trusting new roommates. She double-checks locks, keeps a security camera in her room, and refuses to let anyone borrow so much as a sweater. Therese, most disturbing part? She found one last thing in her email inbox weeks later. A message from an untraceable account with no subject. The body of the message simply read, "You live such a beautiful life. Thank you for letting me try it on." She never responded, and Haley was never seen again. So the next time someone seems too quiet, too polite, too perfect, just remember Olivia's story. Sometimes the person sleeping down the hall doesn't want to live with you. They want to live as you, and that was her disturbing true roommate horror story.